Okay, so let's get into this so you guys can get on with your day. I'll put this up on the screen. All right, so looking at our cybersecurity classroom, look at our grade screen. Oh, man, my virtual fake student here is behind. I mean, he needs to go back and redo this assignment. He only got 40% on that. But this week is 1.04. So, and next week is the exam. So we're about to wrap up the first module. Let's look at 1.04 today. If we go back to the activities, fake student's got to go back and redo his assignment. He didn't want to take a 40. He hadn't tried it multiple times yet. 1.04 operating systems lesson. All right, so to understand how to keep a computer secure, you need somewhat of an understanding of how computers work. So we're going to learn about operating systems today. So anyone working in the cybersecurity industry needs to know how to install and maintain an operating system. So we got a little 2-minute video we're going to watch talking about the evolution of operating systems.
Back in the 80s, hair was huge, phones still had cords, and we were all going back to the future. Pop culture wasn't the only thing that was different. The 80s were the early days of computing. In order to work, computers needed an operating system, or OS, that let users run applications. Starting up your PC looked something like this.
I worked on one of those. Yep.
By the early 90s, both Microsoft and Apple had released operating systems with a graphical user interface, or GUI. GUIs made using a computer more accessible for everyone. Operating systems have evolved through the years and developed a more modern personality, but the function remains the same. The operating system on your computer or mobile device has 3 important jobs. First, it manages all the resources on your machine, like the CPU, disk drives, and printers. Second, it runs software. Programs like a word processor or a video editor need an operating system to support them. Finally, an OS acts as the bridge between the user and the machine. It translates your actions into a usable language for your computer. There are 3 major operating systems on the market today. Windows OS is created by Microsoft and maintains around 90% of the market share. Mac OS comes from Apple, with around 9% of users. Then there's Linux, an open-source OS that users can modify and distribute for free. Regardless of which OS you choose, they all have the same important tasks, running the essential functions of your computer and acting as the link between human and machine. There's no telling how operating systems will evolve as technology changes in the future. What's your prediction?
All right, nice little background of operating systems. I did use a computer just like the one they showed with the 5 1/4 inch floppy disks. I programmed it. When operating systems started back then, we didn't have a mouse because there was nothing on the screen that you could click on. Everything had to be just lines of text. You just saw lines and you'd have to type commands, what you want the computer to do. You'd have to type a command. That was the first operating systems. But then they got to where Windows came out and the Apple came out with their computers. And I'll tell you, it talked about Windows having 90% of the market. I knew that was going to happen back when it first came out because Apple controls their stuff so tightly. If you wanted an Apple computer, you had to go to an Apple store. That's the only place you could buy an Apple computer. Windows, you could buy them at Walmart. You could buy them at, every store that carried computer stuff carried Windows stuff. So Windows became the dominant market because you could buy them anywhere. You could buy computers that had Windows anywhere you could buy computers. But Apple, you could only get them in an Apple store. So if there wasn't an Apple store near you, so right away I said, Apple's is never going to be very big in the computer world because they control it too tightly and won't let anyone else sell it. And that's what happened. They've only got 9% of the market. So Windows is the big boy. So let's look at operating systems here. A computer will work without any applications or software installed, but it has to have an operating system. It basically just has to have some way for you to have the computer do something. So the operating system manages the memory, software, and hardware. So you can have something. So there's the three it talked about: Windows, Mac, and Linux, which Linux is what programmers like to use because you can go in and change the operating system. It's not locked up like these are, where you can't go in there and change Windows. You can change settings, but you can't actually rewrite the operating system code, but you can on Linux. So command line, like this is what it looked like when I started, like MS-DOS, MS-DOS. Very early in systems like MS-DOS from Microsoft were command line based operating systems. You saw a black screen with a green or white cursor waiting on you to type a command. Wasn't very user friendly, and you had to really know a lot about computers to be able to use it. But when they got to the GUI, right, the graphic user interface, GUI, in the mid 80s, that's when Microsoft and Apple both came out with that, where now the common person without a lot of computer knowledge could start using computers, because you could see icons and click on things and learn how to use it a lot easier. You could see what you're doing and have the system function at the click of a mouse. For the first time, the computer at home was a possibility. Before that, not many people had computers at home at all. So did you know a macro, which you can use Microsoft Excel, it has macros built into it. It's like a little tiny computer application, but its job is to imitate keystrokes or mouse action. So if you build a macro in Excel, it does a series of commands for you. It's like, run this macro, boom, boom, boom. It'll do multiple things. So it can replace a repetitive series of keyboard and mouse actions. It's common in spreadsheet and word processing applications. You can write a macro in Word. So, well, it sounds like a wonderful thing. It can also be a threat, because attackers can write macros to get in there and do all these things in your computer real fast. And there's malicious macros. So in the top ways that organizations are compromised. So you have to be very careful. You got to weigh the risk when you enable them, because you have to turn it on macros. It doesn't automatically use macros unless you enable macros. And so if you do that, you got to be aware of the risks that go with that. All right, let's look at page 3. Operating systems. There we go. For every device. Today, almost all computers and mobile devices come preloaded with some real-time operating system. Right, a client or a network operating system could be another option on there. People typically use the one that comes on your device. If you buy a Windows computer, you're probably just going to use Windows. If you buy an Apple computer, you're going to use the iOS Apple software. So Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, Linux. Each of the three have a different look and feel. So embedded operating system, the real-time operating systems, that's what's in your watch, that's what's in your phone, video games, they all have an operating system built into them. Client operating systems, known as a desktop operating system, be like Windows, the Mac, Linux, they're standalone. They work in there. The networks, where you have computers linked together. So a network operating system will run like the printer and the computers that are connected to it, and it manages multiple devices. So the key difference between the client operating system and the network operating system is just the number of users. The client operating system, Windows, just is running your computer only. All right, so the client operating system works with like phones, laptops, other portable devices, watches, all that stuff. The network runs on a special device called a server. So you have a network server. It'd be a picture of a big one right there. It's used by numerous computers at one time. So did you know, here's an interesting thing, there are several operating systems to serve many different purposes. Even if your device comes installed with an operating system, it's possible to upgrade or change one. Like people that use Linux generally buy a computer that uses Windows, and they take the Windows operating system off of the hard drive and install the Linux operating system instead. You can change the operating system on your computer. It is possible. All right, boot sequence. So when you turn on your computer, there's that boot sequence. It runs all those little commands and all this happens, and then suddenly it pops up and your mouse starts working once the operating system runs. But there's a startup sequence. So the boot device is the device that your operating system is loaded for. And when you start up like your Windows computer, it's going to look for first something to boot up on the CD-ROM if it has one installed. They're starting not to even install those now because of the cloud and all that. But it'll generally look for the CD first, because if there's an error and your operating systems get corrupted, there's usually a disk that you put in your computer, and it'll boot off that disk so you can get the error repaired and your computer start working again. So that's why it always checks the CD-ROM first if you have one installed. After that, then it'll look for the hard drive, right? If there's no CD-ROM in there, then it'll look and say on your hard drive and say, what do I need to boot? And then after that, it'll look at removable devices. Do you have something plugged into it? Do you have a portable hard drive? Do you have a USB drive? And then if you're hooked up to a network, it'll look for a boot on the network if all of these others fail. So in this example, the BIOS will try to boot from the CD drive first. Then if that fails, from the hard drive. And then if that fails, from the USB drives. And then it'll try to boot from the network. And if that fails, it just won't boot at all. And your computer won't be running. So computer powers up. The BIOS is an operating system that's binary. That's down at the computer level. And the BIOS starts up, and that's when it usually goes out and grabs Windows or whatever your main operating system is. Post, it's a process performed by firmware or software routines immediately after a computer powered on. That's what your BIOS does. It finds which device to boot from and loads your operating system. So startup utilities, right? Sometimes it seems like it takes forever for the computer to boot up. Well, that's what happens when there's a lot of programs and applications that load automatically as soon as the computer boots up. It's loading all these different applications, all this different software is loading in there. And that can slow your computer down a lot. So usually there's some startup utilities built in these days. So some programs need to load when the computer starts up, like your antivirus, your firewall, all that should. But a lot of programs just are wasting startup time and resources. So usually, like Mac users and groups use, where's that? Have this users and groups, and it'll show you what all is starting up. On computers, Windows computers, if you go to the task manager, there's a startup tab, and that will tell you what all is starting up when the computer's turned on. So if it's really getting slow, you may go to the startup and see that some of these programs have automatically installed themselves in your startup. And you're like, that doesn't need to start with my computer. You can turn those off to where it doesn't boot up so many things. So very useful. All right, let's look at the next piece here. Maybe. Here it comes. Common operating system elements. So operating systems usually have the same capabilities because users have the same basic needs. So it doesn't matter what operating system you have. Usually they all do pretty much the same thing. Just lets you navigate with shortcut keys, screen captures, accessibility options. So file management. So your operating system is going to have file management. It's a software program that helps your users manage all your files because you save stuff and you need to go be able to access them and figure those out. So pretty much all operating systems have some kind of file manager built in there. So you can view, edit, copy, delete files. Then there's a network manager controlling all the data moved between the computer and your network. So like when you're connected, like when you're at the school, we're connected to a big network. There's hundreds and thousands of computers hooked up to the network. So your computer does have a network manager when it connects to a network. Input output manager. So that manages like the mouse and the keyboard and all of that because that is input. Your keyboard is input for you. Your mouse is input. So there's an input output manager. Even your screen, that's an output. So that's controlled by the input output manager. And then there's the memory manager that controls your RAM and your ROM and creates that virtual memory on your hard drive. So when your hard drive gets full, your computer starts running slower because it's trying to use that for memory as well. So, all right. Last page of the lesson. Knowledge check. And I'm going to actually let you do this on your own. I'm not going to. This has got 3 questions. So we're check to what do you know. Operating systems, taking extra time to boot up. What should you look at if your computer's getting slow? All right. So there's 3 questions there just to check to see if you understood what the lesson taught you there. All right. Complete the reading, check your understanding, and let's look at the assignment for this week. Operating systems. Which operating system is designed to manage communication between a group of computers? So you have, again, 5 multiple choice questions. Now, next week, you'll have the test. So make sure on these, they're just 5 multiple choice, but make sure you're understanding what they're asking. Because next week, we do have the exam to end Module 1 on there. So, all right. Any questions? You guys good on that? Doesn't take a whole lot to cover our lessons in here. It's a pretty slow-paced class, quite honestly. Just 1 lesson a week, and that covers everything we need to know for the year. So we're in good shape. So this week is a B day, so we'll only meet on Wednesday if you need help on anything. But otherwise, I know all of you, both of you guys are over 70%, so you're not required to be here at this point. So we will see you guys next time, unless you have a question. See ya.